Less than a year after the NES Classic came and went, Nintendo has announced the Super Nintendo Classic Mini, coming out at the end of September. And if you're a retro game collector like me, I don't think you should buy one. Here's why. The Super Nintendo might be my all-time favorite game console ever released, home to some of my favorite video games ever made. And while the SNES Classic announcement had me incredibly excited, I quickly decided I would not be buying one. And you may be asking, well, if it's your favorite system, why wouldn't you get one? And my answer would be, I'm not getting one because it's my favorite system. And that sounds contradictory, but it makes sense, and just stay with me here. But first, a little background info. The Super Nintendo was originally released between 1990 and 1993, depending on where you live in the world, and it's the best-selling 16-bit gaming console, for good reason. It was a remarkably compelling system with incredibly fun games and memorable soundtracks. I first got one in 1996, when my sister's boyfriend at the time was upgrading to the newly released Nintendo 64, and he sold me his Super Nintendo for cheap. Now, I have countless memories playing games like Super Mario World, NBA Jam, Contra 3, Donkey Kong Country, and so many more, but most notably was Yoshi's Island. Now, aside from the games that he gave me with the console, Yoshi's Island was the first video game that I ever bought brand new with my own money. And I put hours and hours into that game, eventually 100%ing it, and it's one of the reasons why I was so excited to hear about the SNES Classic release, since Yoshi's Island is one of the 21 games being included on the system. Now, I wasn't excited that I could possibly play it again, since I can already do that. I still have a Super Nintendo, and I have a copy of Yoshi's Island. What I was excited about was the thought that somebody else would be able to now have access to a game and a console that meant so much to me. And that's really at the heart of my point. The Super Nintendo Classic Mini is not for game collectors. It's for people who used to play these games 20 plus years ago, but they haven't touched a Super Nintendo controller since, or even more so, it's for people who may love video games, but have never had a chance to play these classic consoles. It should be an opportunity to share the love for younger people who have heard so much about this magical era of video gaming to get their hands on an actual Super Nintendo controller and give it a try. It's for parents to show their kids what gaming was like during their childhood. And if all of these Super Nintendo Classic consoles are snatched up by collectors who already have a real Super Nintendo, who already have these games on the original cartridges, then the magic doesn't get shared around. It gets hoarded like bananas in Donkey Kong's cave. Now, there are some big arguments against this idea. One being that anyone who is interested in playing these classics can buy an old Super Nintendo or another console that can play Super Nintendo games and give it a go. Well, yeah, but that's easier said than done. Some of these old games can be quite expensive. Retro game collecting has exploded over the past decade. Now, simply put, there are two versions of the console, one for North America and another for Japan and Europe. Each share 15 titles with 5 different additional titles, plus one unreleased game, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, according to Pure Gaming's Super Nintendo Collector's app, for all 20 games in the North America collection, it would cost you about $820 US for all of the original carts. Almost 1/4 of that is just for Earthbound, by the way. And for the curious, if you wanted all of these games complete with box and manual, it would cost you over $2,000 US. So for someone who hasn't played these games but is just curious to try them, the $80 retail cost for the Super Nintendo Classic is much more affordable and appealing than the $820 price tag to get just the carts, and that's if you can find them all, and if they're not marked up in price by retro game resellers, which they most definitely will be. For collectors, I think it's safe to say that you already have the majority of these games. I'm not even that hardcore with my collection. I only get the games that I would actually play and remember, and I have 11 out of the 15. I think collectors do and will want the original carts anyway, so let's leave the Super Nintendo Classic for other people to enjoy. And yes, there's the Virtual Console, but again, there's a price issue here, and it's just not the same as experiencing things with an actual SNES controller. Now, the main argument against my point is that there's an additional game being included on the SNES Classic that I briefly mentioned earlier, and that is the previously unreleased Star Fox 2. And yeah, that's a great point. I really can't argue with that. Here's a Super Nintendo game that we never got to play legitimately, and now we have a chance to, as collectors and as Nintendo fans in general. I mean, in a perfect world, Nintendo would give this game a broader release. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to see them put this out on an actual SNES cart in the old-style packaging? They won't, but it would be pretty great. Anyway, I'm just getting sidetracked here, but Star Fox 2 makes the SNES Classic a very collectible item for retro game collectors. And if you are someone who hasn't played Star Fox 2 on a repro cart or on an emulator, or if you want to see if this is a fully polished and finalized version, I can totally see why this system would be on your radar. So, all things considered, collectors are going to want this console. But we all know what happened last year when the NES Classic came out. In true Nintendo style, there were shortages, and resellers made their money by marking things up to insane prices. At the end of the day, the whole experience of the NES Classic release was completely robbed of all the potential joy it could have brought, and now the consoles are owned mostly by collectors. There was an opportunity to spread the joy of the Nintendo Entertainment System, and we ruined it. I really hope the same doesn't happen with the SNES Classic, so I won't be getting one. And it comes back to my previous answer to why. Because it's my favorite system. Maybe I'm being too idealistic, but I have beautiful memories of these games. The thought that someone else has an opportunity to have a similar experience, to play these games for the first time, that excites me. And if by me buying one for myself, when I already have access to most of these games, means someone else won't get that chance, then I won't get one. And if you're a retro game collector who loves the Super Nintendo as much as me and already has these games as well, I don't think you should buy one either. So those are my thoughts, and yeah, I know I'm being too idealistic here, and I know that collectors and resellers will be buying these consoles on day one, but still, I like the idea of someone being able to play the SNES for the first time because of the SNES Classic. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and please subscribe if you want to hear more from me, but most of all, thanks for listening.